it kind of came up early in the fitness place, and one of the things I learned early on was that I early on in my own coaching career, I changed from calling it mental toughness to mental fitness because a couple reasons. I found that toughness implied that you either have it or you didn't, and then I just knew my own world, and then especially working with athletes just in the gym, some stuff we did in the gym, I develop different ways to train people to do better in handling that type of stress. And I like the idea of the fitness element because you can train it. But also, I think it is a perishable trait, and so you could lose it. In other words, and I've seen myself, we'd see the self like in a micro level at the gym where we would take and get away from doing hard work capacity for a little bit and then come back to it. And the first time we did it wasn't mentally fit, after we came back to it, and I had to get used to it again. And I see that these days in the mountains, did some spring bear hunting this year. And it seems like every time I get back to the mountains in the early spring and summer, that's when I'm back there alone, backpacking around, ultralight backpacking and stuff. I'm just like, you know, just not that comfortable. Everything hurts. I'm kind of whiny, and it takes a couple 3 days before I kind of push through that stuff. So, you see the essay that I wrote. Any criticism about the attributes that I came up with, the key elements, any suggested changes, any places we can consolidate? So I'll just throw that to you, Brian, first. I mean, if you had to criticize what I came up with, what are your criticisms?
Yeah, I made a couple notes, and I don't think it's necessarily a criticism. It's just more of a maybe an observation. Are the core attributes correct? And my thought was, well, maybe. I mean, at least based off of the criteria that you put together, Rob, they're correct, or we think they're correct. Um, they could be, it could be something else, right? It could be, why not grit instead of resilience, or grit and resilience, the same thing kind of stuff. I'm just using that as an example. And my thought is that, with respect to the core attributes, it's never going to be an exact science. I mean, it's based off of criteria that you established. It could be a little bit different for others based off of how they look at it. But as sort of the academic side of me and how I think about things, it'd be pretty cool to empirically test this, like to do some research. Um, do some research across different groups, across law enforcement, fire, military, mountain athletes, and sort of see if these are in fact the core attributes that align with the criteria that you established, or if they're maybe there's something else. But it's not a criticism. It's just I think a way to sharpen it would be to empirically test this via some field research and um, yeah, a field research with a little bit of I guess sort of I don't want to say academic rigor, but empirically test it. That makes sense, or did I just ramble?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I did. I thought grit was too general. I've taken a look at Duckworth. You've read Grit and Duckworth, right? And of course, that was her study at West Point, um, uh, and I remember there was some criticism about the way she went about it. But grit to me was too general. Like resilience and perseverance are interesting. They're close, but not the same.
I would agree.
Um, and it took me as I went kind of through this process to kind of understand that there's a difference between them. Be able to come back from big setbacks or failure, which is really what resilience is, and perseverance is kind of continuing to grind when the progress is slow or there's really no slow progress. And I kind of thought about perseverance where you're I guess you're there's this I can't remember what the fable is, but a guy's chipping away at a stone with a hammer and chisel, and the thousandth hit doesn't break, the thousand and first does. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
there's many times, and when I've kind of done that in my own life. So I was going to ask you specifically, you thought those were too close together.
I, I well, I did not. I mean, I think there is a clear difference between resilience and perseverance. I don't find them to be similar. It's certainly the way you you defined it in the article and then provided an example. I think it clarifies it. I mean, I believe they are distinct. Um, but you know, and I get grit. I mean, there's a lot of debate over that term and how we define it and that type of thing. As I was reading this, and I read it a couple times. I don't mean to hog the mic here, but just real quick, the first time I read it, it somewhat felt a little bit like we were going to go down the road of emotional intelligence, and there's a little bit of that in there, I thought, but I think what you provided with mental fitness is distinct from emotional intelligence. But at the end of the day, I think a way to sharpen it would be to do a little bit of a field study and some empirical work just to really refine it and tighten it up, depending on what you want to do with it. Maybe you're like, no, I mean, I'm good with it, but I think that would sharpen it. Personal opinion.
Any comments from you, Dan, on criticisms of the different categories or additions or subtractions?
Yeah, for the attributes, I too got hung up on perseverance for two reasons. I think perseverance, if we had to remove one of the 8, it would be that one, because I think it connects enough with discipline, focus, and mental endurance, and as well as resiliency. But the other, I guess the second reason, and not a criticism, but this was a lens and I guess a justification of why potentially perseverance doesn't belong as a mental attribute. I looked at all of them and said, can these, I know one of the ultimate questions is, can these be trained and ultimately measured? Out of the 8, I felt like perseverance was the one that could never be disconnected from physical fitness. In other words, like maybe down the road you can assess emotional control with nothing physically related, focus without anything physically related. But I feel like perseverance always has something physically relating to it, that you're going another step, you're physically moving to another objective, whereas the other 7 may not.
Well, what about getting becoming an orthopedic surgeon or getting your PhD?
Persevering through that program to get a PhD?
Yeah, I started a PhD program, and after the first course, I was like, I just can't give it, man. It's not going to work for me. And I was like, I'm out. You know what I mean? And I've never had a problem academically, but I mean, the stuff they looked at was definitely not what I thought it was, and there was just no way I was going to put that kind of screen time in. But I mean, if we were to take a look at, even getting a bachelor's degree, I think a general collegiate dropout rate is right around 50%, if not more. People who start college end up getting their bachelor's degree. I remember talking to my sister one time about what is the real value of a bachelor's degree, and she said, I don't look at it in terms of the education attainment. I look at it in terms of the perseverance of the kid who stayed in and got it, And, if you take a look at West Point, or I think West Point, their Army, and Navy, and Air Force, 10-15% attrition rate. My class of the Academy, Coast Guard Academy, is 40%. It's significantly higher. Me and Brian have argued about how much more difficult Coast Guard Academy is than West Point academically, because it was academics that did it. But the military academies, this is the interesting thing about, I remember this is my criticism of Duckworth. She chose the wrong schools. She should have chose a regular college where, attrition rate is 50%, and seeing those guys just stick around. I mean, there's a lot of institutional support at West Point to stay in, right? A lot. So I think she chose the wrong universities. I mean, when you don't have an easy out, or you don't have other stuff but so I guess going back to you, Dan, I mean, the idea, I mean, just in terms of mode specificity, you can find somebody who's really good. Maybe you've seen this. I was going to ask you both in your military careers, if you've seen soldiers or junior officers or something who are really good on the fitness, physical side, but they get doing the staff work, which just as fucking important, right? A good staff guy, and they melt. They don't have the mental fitness to do good staff work because it's below them, or they don't like it, or they can't muscle through it, and you want people who do both. So you have these like different modes. So I guess giving back to you, Dan, in terms of this idea that perseverance has to have the physical element. Those examples I gave, I don't understand where you came up with that. What am I missing there?
You're not. Yours a obviously a fair argument, and I think I know I just defaulted to, if we were to use your PhD example, I would see that was a lack, or a lack of focus, a lack of discipline, a lack of mental endurance. I just didn't define that as perseverance, and that's hearing your side of it. I would probably want to keep it now within the 8, but I was really just trying to critique them, and that was the only one I came up with.
The way I think about mental endurance is duration compared to perseverance. So perseverance would be like months, years, weeks, days. Mental endurance is like hours. It's like like when you guys are downrange and you're getting 4 hours sleep a night, and you're up for 28 hours and you got to be sharp in the crisis center or whatever. That type of mental endurance, where you have that intense focus, but it's a way. I think you have to kind of train that too, right? There's a tie to physical fitness too, but not a direct tie. You can be physically fit and just lose it emotionally or mentally on the endurance side. I certainly saw that, not necessarily in the military, but in my civilian world, having my own companies.
Mm-hmm.
You had, when I was talking to you, or you were nodding your head, Brian, about soldiers who had really good mental fitness on the physical stressor side, but maybe not on the staff stressors. Can you go into some examples of that, or what you've seen?
Yeah, and I mean, and it's vice versa. You've got officers or NCOs or soldiers that are real good in terms of problem solving, staff work. Putting together training exercises, resourcing training, but the other aspect of being of a soldier from the physical perspective, they're not there, right? And so, as I was thinking about, like, I've never used the word actually mental fitness. I don't think I've really ever used that term that way before. I mean, and as I was thinking about this, I think about physical fitness and mental fitness, and then I equate physical fitness, physical training, mental fitness, mental training. You train these two areas to achieve a specific outcome, and this gets to your point of what you call it, is it transferable, right, kind of thing. And I don't think it is. Like, I don't think just because you've got great mental endurance in to do, let's go perseverance. You got perseverance to finish a PhD program. It may not be transferable. I would argue it's not, to persevering on a mountain to accomplish some sort of summit or something like that. So they've got to be trained differently. Just like for physical training, you train strength, you train endurance, you train agility, you train whatever to the specific event you're training for. I mean, it's the mountain's the mountain, right? And so you train for that. And I would argue that the mental fitness side of things is the same way. And truthfully, I hadn't thought about that before in the way that you outlined it. But back to your original question, yeah, I definitely have seen leaders that are not holistically developed on the mental and the physical side, and that's a problem.
I was thinking about before, as I got more mature in the gym and working on the idea of mental fitness, and the one exercise I would use would be to give athletes like a 30-minute pretty intense grind, or a 40-minute grind, say. So like, step ups and sprints and maybe sandbag something. And I'd be pushing them through. They would see they were coming. And then about 30 seconds beforehand, I'd say, oh, change my mind, just keep going. Right? Because you're watching that clock. and then they keep going. And you could look at people's faces right away and see how that impacted them,
Yeah.
right? And I remember a really good athlete, like a good, like a professional, full on sponsored, highest level free skier, just almost lost it. It
Yeah.
was so, and other people just, and I would stop it, and I would only let him go for a little bit. Okay, I stop it now. I want you to remember when I said you had to keep going and what your reaction was. And that's the mental fitness thing here. And ideally, in my mind, the reaction is unemotional. Just like, okay, go. Because you have too much emotion, whether it's getting psyched up or getting down on yourself. Both those take so much energy and they don't sustain it. You just want to, just almost no reaction. I had one guy go, yeah, he was always like that. He's like, yes, more training, right? But I certainly have seen that same thing in terms of transferability in a non-mental or in a non-physical example before. I'm just trying to think about it. Like your for example, staff job, and you just keep going back to your boss. I remember having to write a letter in the Coast Guard for my bosses. Oh my God. And, getting back and getting changes, and all this stuff, and just thinking you have it done, and then your boss gives you another change at the end or something, and being pissed off or whatever, upset or poopy pants about it, and pushing through. But it's the same type of thing. You think you're almost done, and you're not. How do you react to that? Do you give up? Do you quit? The one that was a little bit new to me this was emotional control. And you've all seen people who get fired up and start who get angry. Usually it's usually the anger.
Yeah.
I guess any thoughts about that idea? I guess I'm coming back at you, Brian. I'm saying I'm not too sure there is that much difference between the physical side and the mental side. The mode is the same, but it's still something that's happening in your head, right?
Well, I guess to the idea of is it transferable? I mean,
Got it.
and so an example that comes to mind is I guess maybe about a year ago, I was on a backpacking trip in the Adirondacks, and one of the people on the trip was I'm not sure I would classify this person as an elite CrossFitter, but this dude, was a really good CrossFit athlete, and I got a great guy, but he just quit on the mountain, and he's like, hey, I'm done. And maybe we could attribute it to the fact that he he didn't have, maybe it's a physical thing, right? The physical stuff that allowed him to be successful in CrossFit did not allow him to be successful in the Adirondacks, which I mean, maybe we could make that argument. But as I thought about this whole event, what I realized is this guy pushes through these CrossFit events to maximize his time, to get, to get the best times in these wads. But when it came to, summiting, one of the high peaks in the Adirondacks, it was just like, no, man, it's like his mind quit before his body. And that's where my thought is in terms of the transferability of, say this idea of perseverance or just discipline. And I'm looking down at my notes here. Is the mental discipline to push through. I know I'm probably conflating terms. May not be transferable from this event to another event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's something I have seen and experienced, and that's in term from a training perspective. I wonder why we can't train it so it's more transferable. And that's something I'm just, because those two examples that I gave, one, in a job, academic or something related versus, a physical stressor, the the decision on how you react, which is the mental fitness side, still happens in your head. right? So why, I wonder, I don't have an answer for that. Why aren't they more transferable? How come you can be a calm, cool, great, generous leader at work and then, go through a divorce and have a vicious divorce with your ex-wife and do some nasty stuff, right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I'm sure if you've ever gone through a divorce of kids, you kind of know how that comes up, and you've probably seen people who've gone through that, who've struggled. I don't have an answer for that. I'm curious as why it isn't.
Well,
Any, go ahead.
just one, and I'm sure Dan has seen the same thing I've seen is like you'll have a soldier, a leader, an officer, an NCO that finds himself into some trouble. He's going through some personal situation, and I've often said at times like, man, that's like not who he is. I mean, I don't know what happened, right? It's not the same person that I know leading soldiers. And I don't, I mean, I don't have an explanation for it. I would just agree that, when you think about the emotional control side of things, um, like night and day, this isn't the guy this is not who he is. Mean, I've said that, right? I've said, this is not who he is. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is who he is. Who the hell knows? I'm sorry, Dan. I didn't mean to, or Rob.
If I could just carry on with that real quick, though, with what Brian's saying, it's so incredibly frustrating and accurate. And to that point, I think, Rob, one of your questions was about counseling any subordinates on mental fitness. And I don't have the math to back it up, but I think I could make the argument the majority of counseling for junior officers was on emotional control. I didn't call it that at the time, but it came down to the fact that they were very talented physically for the most part, did decent work for what was expected of them, but so many of them wore their emotions on their sleeve, or just didn't know how to professionally carry themselves in an argument or a disagreement with a superior. So the mental fitness attribute for emotional control is one that I think is very applicable, because it also then applies to those. I think it's very applicable to your combat situations as well. If they're doing it, if they're not able to control emotions in a garrison environment, if you will, I think that definitely will carry over for the most part in any type of live fire training or combat operations as well.
Yeah, that emotional control one, I think, is one that definitely needs to be in there, and is, um, you know, like you're saying, that's not the guy I know, right? I wonder if that also is. We talk about the transfer of modes, and you're just not familiar with the stressor in that mode, and so your example of the CrossFit guy, he understood what it was like to feel, that the physical stressor in his mode. You put him in a new mode, he never seen that before, so he kind of reacts like, instead of falling back on what he learned through his CrossFit stuff, right? Like, you guys have heard this before. You don't rise to the demand; you always fall to your training, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't understand how that transfers across, um, you had pointed out something, Brian, just this idea of, but I guess sticking to the thing, the last one is that performance self-awareness. So I guess I continue my thought here. On the CrossFit side, you can kind of understand your performance based in that mode of CrossFit. And then you get a long grinding endurance event like an alpine climb, you're not you're not as familiar with what the performance expectation is. And so there, maybe you lost the awareness of it, right? Of where you should be aware. Same thing if you're going from, really being good at work to an interpersonal thing with the divorce example. That performance self-awareness, I don't know. I guess the question I'm thinking right now is, if you can have that performance self-awareness if you've never seen that stressor before.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was thinking of back in March, I was in the White Mountains, and I was with a guide who I have been on Denali. I was on Denali with him a few years prior, and we were talking about something very similar. He'd been doing some guiding for a couple guys that were we're gonna attempt Denali, this climbing season. And one of them, ironically, was a CrossFitter, very owned a CrossFit gym, really super fit guy. Um, there were a couple issues, I think. One was he wasn't training specifically to climb for an alpine climb. He's kind of relying on his CrossFit ability. So that probably was issue number one. But to this performance awareness piece, my buddy Keith, he didn't use this term, but I think he described it in a way that you've sort of categorized it as an attribute. And it just didn't. Part of his problem that he was having, he was in his head because he really didn't know what to expect. And so, that mental fitness side of things, and Keith didn't say this, I'm just sort of drawing this point out. The individual's mental fitness side of things was not where it needed to be, specifically with performance awareness. So, I guess, as I think through this, I think about my own experiences where I might not have been as mentally prepared as I should have for the event I was participating in. And I was relying on my experiences in different events and different things to sort of carry over, and it didn't carry over.
Have you, put you on a spot here a little bit, have you seen a hole in your mental fitness in the corporate world that you never saw on the military side in your job there now? Maybe not a big hole, but I don't know, maybe it is a hole where you wanted to flame on somebody and you probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at I'm not looking down because I'm trying to avoid answering this. I'm looking down because I got the attributes written here. But no, I mean that's a really good question. And I'm stalling so I can think about it.
You can think about it a little bit. Something comes up, but go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say maybe right off the top of my head, maybe focus. In the sense of what we're working on, I may not view as like, hey, why are we doing this? I've been in life or death situations. This is not that important. But the truth of the matter is, it is important. It's important for the business. It's important for business reputation, and those types of things. And so, from a focus perspective, I could easily discount something that we're working on because I just don't feel that it's not life or death. So why the hell are we worried about it? Well, it might not be life or death, but it's got significant impacts on the business's reputation, kind of thing. I could give you a problem. So I think the short answer is yes. I just need to be a little more coherent in articulating it. But I bet you I could go down each of the 8 attributes and probably find an example over the past couple of years since I've entered corporate America where there's a gap in my mental fitness.
Can either of you think of another example where you went to do something and were surprised about what a wussy you were? Like for me, it was backcountry hunting. The first time I went backcountry hunting, I mean, I up and quit the trip because it was all mental. I was like, this is impossible, right? And and the thing about hunting is things can change on a dime, and then you have to learn it's just being out there. And it's I don't know why it was so different. I've done plenty of backpacking before, lots. Been in the mountains lots before that, but for some reason I just thought it was impossible. And what was I doing? And the next year, I felt so bad about that. Next year I made sure I didn't quit early. Go ahead. And this is in my early 40s, so this wasn't a young man learning that lesson. New mode.
Yeah, I was going to make a recent joke that I just learned this with my lack of performance self-awareness. last week trying to empty 2 trucks of household goods, primarily on my own. And I didn't think that was going to be a problem. Just needed a little bit of help, and it whooped my ass. I was down hard for a couple days. That crushed me.
Yeah, I had a meltdown on a triathlon I did, and I'm not a triathlete. I've done 2 of them because the first one I was so embarrassed. Yeah, I was like, this is bullshit. I was so nobody gave a shit except me because I knew how bad I failed, but it was on the swim. Um, and I got in the ocean, which obviously, it's like amateur hour. I mean, I could go on, but I swam in the pool. I'm like, I'm good to go. I get in the ocean, and the fucking current. I'm lucky I didn't drown. All right, and I shit you not, the lifeguard comes over with the board. It's like, do you want to grab on? And I have this thought of I'd rather drown than grab onto the board. And I probably said that. I grabbed the board, caught my breath. I actually finished the swim. I think I might have been the last one out of the water, and I finished the triathlon with some horrific, horrible, embarrassing time. But yeah, anyway, that's probably more than you bargained for there, but yes, 100%. And that, hey Rob, that happened, my 40s, my late 40s. Yeah.
I know. I like, I had 2 successful business and everything through all that shit and military stuff, and many, workouts and stuff. And I was like full on meltdown in the mountains. So go ahead, Dan. You're trying to embarrass yourself.
I was going to say, we just learned that a lack of or maybe poor performance self-awareness can actually lead to an improvement in your resilience, your emotional control. They work together, that when one's down, you're increasing the other ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this idea of performance self-awareness self-awareness, I think there are some universal elements to that though, right? Like emotional control, putting stuff in perspective. I kind of, as I'm thinking about this, I wouldn't call myself I'm working right now, sir. It's up to you. If that one's good for you, I'm good. Yes, sir. Yeah, emotional control, perspective, the idea of discipline, perseverance, just keep grinding. I see a lot of emails that say just keep grinding. So there are some things I think that can carry over to even to a new mode if you are able to do that in a moment. And I certainly hope that I never have another experience that's similar to. I'm doing something now. I'm trying to learn this downwind foiling thing, and it's been. I can't tell you how bad I am at this and how long of a grind it's been, but it's been interesting just watching myself mentally on this, and actually returning back to my failure in the mountains and drawing from that to apply some of that mental fitness to this new mode. Maybe that's something. I wonder if you can train mental fitness without showing mental fitness failure. But how do you artificially create that? You know what I mean? Go ahead, Dan.
So that's been the most interesting thing about me trying to make more sense of this is I consulted Army doctrine through the holistic health fitness to try to get some more things to spur my brain. Some few other like survival and books. Everything that I read always said it can be trained. I should go back a step. The Army called it mental readiness because, of course, they called it readiness. The survival stuff is more mindset related, and everything said it can be improved and it can be trained. But there was very few, if any, examples as to how that's done. And the only one that, like, for training that kind of came to is experiencing, just from my own experiences through some of the Army programs, was you'd go through some type of physical event, not a stress shoot necessarily. These were low resource. And then they'd put you through a cognitive game that was timed, and every person or team would have that cognitive game. And then if you were faster and did it right, then you were assessed as being better. But that's about it for what I was able to find for like training or assessing this in some tangible way.
Yeah, I was, to that point, I was thinking about this, and I don't think, we intentionally designed our training programs to to um, to get after these attributes. But if you think about like a national training center rotation or a JRTC or whatever, right? The attributes that jumped out at me when you put a leader under stress and you start to throw various contingencies and scenarios at this leader, what you're starting to train is emotional control, focus, mental endurance, being able to do this over a period of time, cognitive flexibility. And even in my corporate job, as we train security teams, we do tabletop exercises, and we've got various injects that we throw at them that stresses them in that time and space, which I think is very much getting at the mental fitness aspect of what we're talking about.
This idea of stress inoculation is one that I've thought about a lot, and I first started thinking about it when we would do our range fitness stuff. And the typical way you train a skill like marksmanship is you cover the basics very well, and then at the end of the training, you start introducing stress. And I always wondered if that was the best way to train stress inoculation, because at that point you're really good with the fundamentals unstressed, but you're not used to them stressed. And so I always wondered if it would be better to introduce stress early in the program as well. Even if the fundamentals went to shit during the stress, at least they knew what the stress felt like. And so in our range fitness events, there would be shooting fundamentals or session. I wouldn't say an event, it'd be a session. There'd be shooting. You'd actually start out with a stress event, a really short stress event, then go into shooting fundamentals, and then finish with another stress event. And that was the beginning of the cycle. And so that was like the first training session for everybody. And then at the end, I guess the judge would be, at the end of 3 or 4 weeks of that or whatever, how they would do on some stress event. But I've never, that was what I was going to study in my PhD if I ever did it. But I'm not going to, there's no way I can deal with the academic side of the PhD and writing that way. But now I think, well, how about for pilots, right? Can you do fly a guy in flight school, contact me and say, hey, I'm interested in this idea. You can introduce stress for pilots early, like first thing, so you can get used to the stress, even though you don't have the fundamentals down yet. But there's the idea of stress inoculation. I don't know if that would help on the mental fitness side or if it's different subjects, but anyway, just an interesting idea to think about. Any thoughts on that, or have you ever seen that before?
So if I could, I think this is somewhat related to but maybe not, definitely not something profound, but as it relates to stress and mental fitness, the one thing I came across that I just simply will say found very interesting, is the heart rate aspect of mental fitness. In other words, there's science that backs up zone 2 type cardio stimulates a healthier mental fitness. It can increase your focus. It can even help with emotional control. But as soon as you start getting zone 3, 4, 5, they're degraded. And so, I didn't have a good executive summary to this point, but all I'm trying to say is I think there's something definitely related in the future for mental fitness connection to a heart rate monitor, or at least not a heart rate monitor, but monitoring the heart rate and then gauging where you're at with those fitness levels, mental fitness levels, excuse me.
Rob, you talked about in your article about how do you train these attributes, and you talked about knowing your weak zone and then exposing yourself strategically, which I think are pretty important points. Not in the sense of, and I'm trying to take it out of the physical physical range. I mean, because I get drawn back into, knowing your weak zone, expose yourself strategically, the whole discussion we had on CrossFit and alpine climbing. I think it's fairly clear to see how you can improve your mental fitness, in that respect, given the guidelines that you talked about. But let's just say let's talk about writing, okay? And or PhD. I mean, I will tell you, my I think my family would attest to you that probably the most stressful time in our Army career was when I was in grad school. Like I was stressed, man. I was on the clock. I was on the Army dime, so it's not like I could take a knee. I had to write a dissertation. I had to get, I had to do firsthand research, and I was like, holy shit, how's this all going to come together? I wasn't smart enough. I just muscled through it, right? I mean, I wasn't smart enough to think through, excuse me, how to train the mental side of this. Because truthfully, I didn't think about it. I mean, I just didn't. I think, and for me, kind of what's coming out of this entire conversation is, and I'm trying to think about how I'm going to incorporate this into my day job, with corporate security stuff is, how do we train how do we get after the mental fitness side of things? Because I've seen in these exercises we do, just take the emotional control piece. People start to, man, I mean, when you're talking about, we just finished up an emergency management summit. And so we were going through tabletop exercises with some pretty significant events that affect the business and people's lives. And you're added a lot of stress, and it's the emotional control piece is starting to really get tapped. And so I guess just to summarize, I mean, for me, it's probably something I wish I had thought about earlier in my career, in my life, because I probably would have made some things a little easier. But at the end of the day, I think the fact that we're talking about this is really important. Whether or not we agree on the attributes, I think the overall concept and the approach is something we got to continue to think about.
Just made me think of something. Does mental fitness require recovery the same way that physical fitness does? I mean, I think it has to, but it might be a completely different subject. Did you need recovery after the PhD?
You're asking me.
Either.
I went right into battalion command.
Oh my God!
I graduated in June and I took command in August. Yeah.
That's so interesting. As I get older, I actually am working on another idea called the mental gym, and I'm as my physical body starts to deteriorate, no matter how much I work, my joints are just going, right? And I don't know that that's necessarily needs to happen to your mind. Like you can keep going, so I'm not too sure you do, right? Other than just like sleep. But I think it's possible to keep pushing your mind, like forever, and keep growing and learning and improving. Now, when I say mental gym, that's what I'm talking about. And so I'm starting to put together, like a 5-day training session for mental, like maybe one day is doing fucking math problems, right?
Yeah.
And one day is writing, and one day is thinking about something. But I am, as plus, you see, I think we're all worried about dementia or Alzheimer's and stuff like that. And, I think we've all seen, at least my case, I've seen 2 people really close to me get older, and they didn't necessarily lose it mentally, but their world got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so little things became big things, and so part of that was because of the physical stuff. And part of it was they just were afraid to try new stuff. And going back to what you're talking about there, Brian, I get emails all the time from guys my age, in their 50s or whatever, and they sign up for I'm going to do the Spartan, sprint. I'm going to do the next level of Spartan, and then the next level of Spartan, and then finally the finest level of Spartan. I'm on a training plan for all of them. Like, dude, man, why don't you plan to do a 2 week, alone backpacking trip across the winds in Wyoming,
Mm-hmm.
where you got to learn some skills. You got to be alone. There's a fitness component to it, but it's not like an artificial event. If it's just a fitness only event and it's sponsored like that, it's almost it's easier than having to come up and doing your own trip planning. And there's just the whole other skill element to it, which is all of this stuff combined. Combined. And I'm just kind of talking here, but those types of things. So I guess when you said to people, like, I know guys, you want to do something hard every year, but that hard every year is something physical, instead of, I want to write a book this year, or, I want to learn the cowboy dance, which for me would be really hard, or, I want to, do a stand-up comedy night just on my own. Right. I remember there was some big star like Will Smith or something, and he wanted to be, I think it was Will Smith, and he had a dream of always doing a mic on stand-up comedy, and he like got Dave Chappelle, kind of trained him up, and all this stuff, and he finally did it. But man, talk about courage and getting out there, being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Rob, you just made me. Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just trying to think out loud. How do you train this, right? And maybe one of the ways you train this is you choose something every quarter that is uncomfortable, to see if you can keep your emotional control together. If you can keep that mental endurance. Maybe it's entering a chess match. Or a poker tournament, right? Learning poker, that's a mentally intense friggin' thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to ask is, and I'm kind of stealing this from, again, Army doctrine, but when you put this together, did anything social related ever be considered for an attribute? Just hearing you talk about people that you talk to and maintain relationships over time, is there an aspect of, it's not social awareness, but maybe relationship management? I think the Army called it social acuity or something that didn't really make sense to me, but I think that might have a place in mental fitness as well. I don't know.
Yeah, the only one I have down there is kind of that emotional control, and I can just tell you, going through a divorce with kids, definitely in terms of performance self-awareness, not the proudest day of my life, right? Or proudest months, of perseverance, resilience, focus, emotional control, mental endurance, flexibility. And Brian had spoken earlier about emotional intelligence, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'd said or something.
Yeah.
And I've heard that buzzword around, and I'm a pretty big introvert. My wife's pretty sure I'm far on the spectrum. She tells me all the time. Like, she'll text me something, I won't respond, and I didn't know I had to respond to that. Like, it's obvious. Do you guys get that too?
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like, get my ass chewed for something I had no idea what I was
I thought it was just information. I didn't realize that.
Generally, if you want a response back, ask a question. Oh my God, there's been, so yeah, but
yeah,
I'm not too sure to say about that, because, but the emotional control, I think, is most gets at that, but I don't know if that's a different thing or not. Go ahead.
You got a thought on that, Dan? I was going to shift gears here for a second.
No, please do, because mine, I don't have any additional thoughts. It was one that just kind of popped in, and I didn't know if I wanted to throw it to Rob to see if it ever came up, but what he said about it made sense for now.
Yeah, Rob, you had asked about, training this. How do we train this? And, maybe it's pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone to learn how to do something that's just not something that we would typically do, not a strength, right? But I would also probably think that we could probably train this in our daily lives. Like, how many times, God, I hope it doesn't happen to me tonight, but your flight get delayed or your flight get canceled or, and you're on the edge of just losing control, right? You're emotional. You want to lash out emotionally. Um, and emotional control is an easy one to use as an example because I think we've all been pushed to a point in our daily lives. I mean, Dan just moved, right? And the movers probably didn't show up well, unless he moved himself.
It was me. It was me.
Yeah, well, so maybe that's not a good example, but but that kind of stuff where I I think my point to this is that there are certain things that you can do, deliberate things to train mental fitness, but some of it's also training mental fitness in our daily lives and those opportunities.
Yeah, just kind of thinking about this is if you, for example, let's say you get done with one of your, as a military officer, you do one of your outdoor exercises where everybody comes in for the after action report, and then you talk about these different aspects as you go down as part of that. In other words, we kind of saw this guy lose his shit, emotional control. This guy, lost some focus here, and this is where it was, or it's a long tabletop exercise. That would be interesting I'm just thinking about the tabletop exercises you're doing there, Brian. You're describing to through that little mental task that I did on my athletes. Oh, you thought this was over? Boom. Now come in. Now, how do you respond to that? As I think about this, I kind of draw back on the stuff I've read about stoicism, where you can only control how you react to stuff. And that's the only thing you control. Of course, that's what give the Stoics their freedom. But a lot of this is how do you react to setbacks in one way or another. So I do like that. Maybe nothing else, the idea just to fall back on these different things and perform a self-awareness after action. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up thought. I'm not really a big journaling person. I mean, I've tried it. I want to be better at it, but if you reflect on the instances in the course of your day where you whether it has to do with emotional control or you think about cognitive flexibility, how you may have shifted fire at work from one project to another, how did you respond to that emotionally? And then were you able to cognitively shift? Were you flexible enough to move there? In the moment, you may not think about it, but if you take some time at the end of the day to reflect on it, I believe that might be another way to help train mental fitness. Just a thought. I'm sorry, Dan, I cut you off.
No, not at all. On the training note, the two thing, I guess really is just one thing with two subcategories that came to mind as I looked at mental fitness and training it. I think the environment matters way more than physical fitness. And what I mean by that is, when at the start of trying to prepare for this, I took a very physical fitness, mental fitness, kind of like Brian was saying at the start of this, and thought of them too similar. Yeah, I can't say the word, but they were too similar in my mindset, where the environment has got to have a bigger role, and you need more resources, I think, for mental fitness. As an example, you can improve a lot of the attributes, I think, by doing things in bad weather. As Rob alluded to on the mountain, I hate large crowds. I refuse to go to rock concerts anymore. Like I don't want to be in those scenarios anymore. They would just destroy my emotional control, and I would start losing it. So I think the environment has a bigger role in mental fitness than physical fitness, and that's lastly to your point about it can happen in our daily life quite a bit. And it was the airports that made me think about that, because I despise mass public transportation and airports.
I take the train to work every day, man. I mean, I'm exercising my mental fitness. We laugh about it, but I mean, truthfully, I hadn't really thought about it until this podcast, this conversation. But I think there is an aspect to it because I mean trains don't run on time. I mean, but yeah, I mean I guess they do sometimes, but the trains that I'm on, they don't seem to run on time. And how do I respond to that? I think is an element of my mental fitness, right? I mean, I know I'm thinking out loud here, but this really is giving me some pause in terms of thinking about how do you train this.
Well, I like this idea, at least for some of these categories, that the measure is how you respond, right? So the measure of resilience is how
Mm-hmm.
you respond to a major setback. The measure of perseverance is how you keep grinding, whether there's little progress or it's really slow.
Mm-hmm.
The measure of discipline is if you do the little things even though you don't want to. Focus, yeah, I guess the measure is that is if you stay focused intensely, and by mental focus, I mean intense mental focus, on something. Generally, it's mostly work related, but emotional control, right? Did you? It's generally, I guess, for men, a turn to anger, could be to fear, in a tactical situation, but certainly in relationship wise, it's anger. Mental endurance is a little bit more difficult because that's, I guess, is perseverance is again over days or weeks or months or years. Mental endurance is like over hours. Like how are you performing at the end of a 24-hour shift or something? Cognitive flexibility is the idea of um, not getting um, just being able to be agile thinking wise in pivoting in my work. Something I have to learn in my work in terms of, everything that we try generally, nothing goes as planned, right? Either hit a wall or hit some kind of wall, and the measure of success is how fast we're able to. We know that what we're going to try is going to be somewhat of a failure. The measure of success is how quick we're able to innovate or pivot to move beyond that failure, and being flexible to that, which means you're not too tied to the original idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not too tied. If you're so tied to the original plan that if something comes up, it's not working, you just don't keep going ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And performance self awareness is all part of that. But I think that this idea of how do you respond, taking, like you said, that self awareness either in the moment, which would be best, where you can self correct immediately if you start getting angry, at the airport or whatever, or in a formal after action, from a journaling perspective. I do think it's important to understand that even though you are strong in one mode, it may not transfer to another. And
Mm-hmm.
mental fitness applies all across all modes, unlike physical fitness, which is just one mode, right? And different types of physical, but it's all, physical fitness. I find that physical fitness is mental fitness and physical is much easier for me than it is. I just wrote an essay on, if you do you hide behind your exercise, you hide your fitness, right? Because there's many times I've avoided hard conversations by going and working out hard and thinking I was better for it, where it really wasn't. Um, so, but this is really an interesting idea. And how do you train it? I guess that's the next test for me. Or maybe the next step would be to set up a checklist. How often do you, I mean, generally you would do this after you've had a bad experience, like I did, like you in your triathlon and me in my hunting, where you take a step back.
Yeah.
There's some type of setback and your response isn't what it was, what you wanted it to be. But you would hope that it would be more often than that, right? We train physically every day. Why can't we train mental fitness every day?
Well, I think that's what I'm saying is, I think we can, right? You complete, session one of whatever program physically this morning, and maybe at the end of the day, you complete session one of your Met Fitness program, which is reflecting on a series of events that happen in the course of the day that may align with one or more of these attributes. And it's your own. it's kind of your own AAR, right? I wrote an article for you, Rob, about a situation where I lost my temper as a battalion commander and I fired the platoon leader on the spot. I embarrassed the shit out of that poor kid. And later on, uh, I was reflecting on it, and I went to my sergeant major, and I said to my sergeant major, "Man, I lost my temper. I shouldn't have, I shouldn't have done that or whatever." And he's like, I thought he was going to say, "Hey, it's all good, sir. Don't worry about it, sir. He deserved it, whatever, whatever." Instead, my sergeant major said to me, "Sir, you're a battalion commander. You can't lose your professional composure ever." And, you know, I was like, Roger that, I mean, so part of it's having a good ranger buddy, right? A good teammate. But when you don't necessarily have that, how can we train this every day? That's just a thought that's kind of jumped into at least that's kind of a takeaway for me.
Yeah, I know. I remember reading, I think John McCain's book on courage, and it's been a while, but there weren't any examples of physical courage in there, right? And the examples were of other types of courage, like standing up in a public meeting and saying something that no one wants to hear. I've done that before. I mean, I remember just in a small town, there was, one small town or one guy was just standing up for his principle, and oh my God, his whole family was ostracized because of it. What courage that guy had. So yeah, it seems that the most, I would argue, the most difficult mental fitness has nothing to do with the physical side. There's no physical element to it. It's some type of relationship thing or work thing that's really difficult.
I agree. I mean, I think as cadets, and all three of us can relate to this, right? As um, some of the hardest challenges that we had at the academy or we see cadets today is, how do you hold your teammate accountable? Do you the social courage to tell someone, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, right? It's hard, the physical courage side is easy, well, it's not easy, but I agree. I mean, I think the mental side of this is much more difficult, but.
And I think we're finding out, or at least I can say I found out that I'm training mental fitness way more in a 24-hour time period than physical fitness. Here, I didn't think of it that way, but now I'm convinced of that in terms of actually assessing it. The reflection piece is something I have dabbled with, but I think there's got to be more to it. I just don't know what it is. I need to stop approaching it from a physical perspective because I think it's going to be different.
Yeah, perhaps the next tool for me in this idea is just to set up a checklist or some type of assessment that you can do frequently. Even though, and it'll probably be based around these attributes. I guess you could apply your own attributes, but just some type of assessment. But I just wonder what would trigger the assessment if you need some type of failure to trigger it, or if you're just looking to improve. I wrote an essay once that I think it's like the constant burden of being an overachiever. And that if you're always so critical, it gets exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to add this into it. Sometimes I just want to lose my shit.
Yeah, but you could learn from you could learn. That's true, man. I mean, but I think you could learn. I don't think you need a failure necessarily to learn, right? I mean, you could reflect on, and you could. How do you replicate that? Like, I didn't lose my shit at the airport at TSA when they made me, basically get undressed. So, I mean, obviously I got the airport on my mind because I'm getting on a plane here, in a couple hours. But anyway.
Yeah, I think definitely work here. I do like the idea of taking it from the suffrage industry, taking ownership of this idea from the suffrage industry and applying it in a more professional or holistic manner. I do think that Duckworth got us started, but it wasn't. I don't think she hit it quite right, and we need to do more work on it for sure. All right, gentlemen, it's been an hour. Any final thoughts here? I do know that the more you think about all these different things, you pretty good way to beat up on yourself. I beat
Yeah.
myself up pretty much thinking through them, but
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I'm not sure. I wish I shared my triathlon story.
Oh.
that's a good one.
No,
Yeah,
I appreciate it, Rob.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, gentlemen.
Thanks, Rob.
Till next time. Yeah.